Hi, I'm Pastor Joy. I'm the pastor of Lakewood Presbyterian Church, and this is our final video in our series of mental health practical help videos. And today I'm with Priscilla Carlsgaard. She is a therapist at Life Renewed Counseling Center. And a couple things I wanted to mention about Priscilla. Number one, she does do couples therapy. And also, she speaks Spanish. So, if you speak Spanish or you know someone who speaks Spanish that is looking for a counselor, she can counsel in Spanish. So, that's just kind of a helpful thing to know about. Today, we have already talked about relationships in our series, but today we're going to talk about something that is just one particular thing that can be really helpful and is important in our relationships as we try to develop and have healthy relationships. And that is the subject of empathy and vulnerability. So, Priscilla, what do we need to know about empathy and vulnerability?
Whew. Well, I think one of the easiest ways to try to understand empathy is to understand what it's not through sympathy, because a lot of these kind of words get thrown together.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately empathy allows us to connect with other
Hmm.
people, and sympathy kind of distance us from other people.
Okay.
So empathy really gives us the ability to get into the headspace of someone else, to dig into their perspective. If you think about it, Dr. Brene Brown talks about kind of being in this pit with the other
Hmm.
person.
Yeah.
So they're going through something, and you go down to the pit, and you're sitting with them in this, connecting with them, realizing what they're going through their perspective, and in that space with them. Whereas sympathy is kind of, outside of the pit, being like, oh, that's a shame. Like,
Yeah.
that's so sad. Feel so bad for you down there. Um, and so, in order to be able to kind of enter that space, to go down into that space with someone, you have to connect and you have to understand them. And the best way to do that is to try to do it through your own connection, through what you've been through, kind of taking little pieces of your pain, your story that you can say, oh, I kind of get that pain. And I kind of
Hmm.
understand how you could be in that space and really feeling that through that perspective. In order to do that, we have to be vulnerable. We have to understand our own flaws, our own failings, our own insecurities and pain, so we can connect with those things in another person.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to ask you. What are the obstacles to empathy? What are the things that make it hard for us to be able to do that? You mentioned like our insecurities, and
Mhm.
um, are there other things that make it hard to be empathetic?
Yeah, well, I think in order to be empathetic, we have to be vulnerable, and that's terrifying
Yeah,
um, for everyone.
yeah.
Um, so being able to be vulnerable means that you're realizing I can be wrong, that
Mm,
you're realizing I have these, fears and insecurities that I'm dragging along with me.
mm-hmm.
And it's putting yourself in this space to open up to another person about it. So not just recognizing in yourself, but then being able to say, I've been through this too, or I'm struggling with this too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, that's a scary place that people don't really want to get to.
Yeah, it's very scary to say, "What if I'm wrong?" I think. And one of the things that I think is scary about that is um, sometimes you may realize if you're wrong, that could mean that you're alienated from a community that you've come from or from people that you love, and that can be scary. I don't know. There's a lot of things that are scary about admitting
Mhm.
that you could be wrong.
Yeah, you could be wrong in the situations. And I think another thing, and I mentioned it in the relationships video, but that being able to empathize with someone and
Hmm.
understand someone doesn't necessarily mean that you have to reject everything that
Yeah,
you might, in order to understand them. You don't have to agree with every single
yeah,
aspect of them. It just means that you're able to think through their perspective, realize where they're coming from, whether or
yeah,
not they've reached the same conclusion you have,
yeah.
but being able to kind of be in that space with them.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And one thing that's helped me is learning to realize that everybody doesn't have the same life experience I have. And so there are reasons why people come to the conclusions or the beliefs or the ideas that they have. Um, there's things that have shaped them, experiences. And so it is really important to try to understand that if you want to be able to empathize, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about this kind of, the scary nature of being vulnerable, and why we would willingly go into that. But I mean, I think ultimately God calls us to be vulnerable in so
Hmm.
many ways. I mean, He talks about, King David being the man after God's own heart. And the Psalms is basically just like an open diary
Mhm.
of, his highs and lows and his screaming at God and his God, you've abandoned me, and oh my
Mhm.
goodness, God, you're the best. Um, and that's the kind of space that, we need to be able to kind of accept and get to.
Yeah.
And realizing, I mean, there's so many verses in the Bible. I think there was one in 2 Corinthians 12:9 through 10, where he talks about, my grace is sufficient for you in your
Yeah.
weakness. And
Yeah.
that's where God's power and strength is displayed in all of our flaws, in all of
Mhm.
our insecurities. And ultimately, that's how we're able to connect with other people, is through those flaws,
Yeah.
and through those kind of broken spots in our, jars of clay.
Mhm.
Um, and then in terms of loving other people, that's how we're able to kind of connect and be able to love other people, through this connection, through this empathy, through us being vulnerable with each other and bearing each other's burdens,
Mhm.
which you can only do if you're sharing about your burdens
Yeah.
and being open and vulnerable in that space.
Yeah. One thing I love about God, you just brought, that's one of my favorite scriptures. And I think it's really true that can kind of, God can handle everything about us, all the good, the bad, the ugly. God already knows it anyway, and yet still loves us. And when you think about what a gift that is to yourself, to think about being able to offer that to someone else as a gift, maybe that's kind of an encouragement or an incentive to try to be more empathetic, to know how important it's been to you to receive that from God and then to be able to share that with someone else.
Yeah. So I mean, I think in terms of just some takeaways, with this, and like how, practically, like how am I supposed to build empathy with other people? Like,
Mhm.
this is a great idea. I would love to be this kind of person. God
Mhm.
wants me to be this kind of person. How can I work on it?
Yeah.
So I think one thing is being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, thinking, processing things in your life, to allow yourself to be in this vulnerable place. Being truly empathetic. So we kind of talked about the differences of being sympathetic and empathetic.
Mhm.
So getting in that headspace with other people, being willing to kind of dig deep and get in a pit with someone else. And then another thing is just realizing that sometimes empathy is enough.
Yeah.
That sometimes as people, we want to fix it, we want to make it
Mhm.
better, we want to, do a silver lining and show them, the upside of it and be a Pollyanna. But sometimes that connection is just what they need in that moment.
Yeah.
And being willing to say, I just need someone to be out in this pit with me.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Anything
Yeah.
else that we should know about empathy and vulnerability? I'm sure there's
I think,
lots of
yeah.
things, but we have limited time.
Yep, I think we're good.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being with me today. And thank you for watching this video and any of the other ones that you've watched. If you've missed any of them, you can go back. They're posted on our church Facebook, and I think they will also be on the Life Renewed Counseling Center's page. So you can find these videos there, and I hope that this has been helpful to you.